This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to go scuba diving during Christmas holidays. So my family and I, 25-year-old female, booked a few dives. They're really good scuba divers, way better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that also allowed them to participate in way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well, and I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor yet. Even more if it's a dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving though, here's a quick explanation. So, you can dive safely until a certain deep before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while going back to the surface a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you ride up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in worst case scenario, to dying. Anyway, so we decided that what I could manage was a little private lesson with an instructor first, prior to more exciting dives with my family. The first day, my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to while I was alone with my instructor and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay, and we were on a beautiful coral reef. There were many beginners on the boat, and I was by far the most experienced here. So, finally my instructor decided that he could manage me with another student, which was a true beginner, and after a small briefing with every safety rule and hand sign, which is the only way to communicate underwater, we began our descent. Everything came back to me pretty quickly, and I was enjoying myself, going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver. It was probably about 20 minutes, I would guess, that we were down there. Everything was perfect too, beside one thing. You see, it was a windy day, and there was a really heavy swell that day. It's less of a problem underwater than it is for the surface swimmer, but the only thing is that it requires more physical effort to swim, and so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which is pretty normal. So I signed to my instructor that I was running thin on air, and he nodded. But at this level, it was far from being critical or anything. It was at this moment, though, that I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor any of the students. In fact, I'd never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot, so I assumed that he was with us, and I just didn't pay attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards us and then signed me that he was out of air. When an air failure happens in scuba diving, there's a very strict procedure. You have to help the person, no questions asked, because every second is vital. If you faint underwater, then you drown. On your gear, you have 2 breathing devices too. I'm not sure about the English words, but there's a main device and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing on my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited until the guy seemed calmed down and tried to hand sign to him to go see my instructor. But strangely, he nodded no and signed to me to start our ascent. I understand this procedure. I was a little low on air and above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was to go up to the surface before having an air failure, but I would have to tell my instructor first. The guy was very reluctant though, and it was strange because it would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started an ascent with us. During this time, I was sort of panicking as seeing my own air levels going down so quickly, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. Well, I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. But once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and sort of nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving towards the beach, well, without the strange guy, mind you, that I asked my instructor what happened. I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down or something? I replied with, Okay, but why did he tell me that he was out of air? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signing, that he was probably not telling me that he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. But I'm certain that I saw him do the air failure sign, but okay, whatever. In any case, the next day I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time, Charlie. I've had time to think about that guy, and I was worried about him, so I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew this guy, and if he was okay because I didn't see him going back to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did, and she told me, "Oh, that's Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time that he has a day off from the restaurant, he's working here. He asks us to drive him on the coral reef for the morning and pick him up in the afternoons. I actually ate at his restaurant this noon and saw him, so don't worry." I was pretty relieved by that, to be honest, and told myself that it was just a big misunderstanding, probably just a sign comprehension issue or something. Anyway, the rest of the week went on without any incident. I was doing more and more technical dives, and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor, and I never saw Marvin again. That is, until the last dive. So, it was New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck, and I felt trained enough to try it without any instructor, just my family and I. It was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me, like 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day, male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too, so we would cross him and he would help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, in fact, and my family felt comforted too when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. And it was at that moment that, completely out of the blue, I saw Marvin swimming towards me again. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, still staying under my decompression stop level. I was a little surprised, to be honest, and even more surprised when he signed me again that he was out of air. I was mistrustful at this point, but if there were any chance that it would be true, I could not help him. So I handed him my spare breather. This time I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't a problem. He took it, started breathing in it, and then took my arm. I reached to see his air level instrument, but he prevented me from seeing it. And then he signed for me to start an ascent with him. I immediately said no. I wasn't at my deepest when he reached me. I had been deeper at this time. But I had decompression stops to do, so I saw that my father saw us, but he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer, a device which calculates when and how long to decompress, to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled, and then just started swimming up, still holding me. I was sort of paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress right now. I then understood, though, that I was now in pretty serious danger, that if I let him do what he wanted, I could die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wriggling frantically as I saw my father and sister way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly towards us, and I managed to hit this guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper, and the guy then quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a very long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. Then we started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously, and on the surface, I just started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my instructor and that this is why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told my instructor everything that happened, who took it more seriously this time, and he told me to show him Marvin when we go up to the surface. The thing is, he never came. The next day, though, on New Year's, we went a last time to the scuba diving club because my little sister had a diploma to collect, and we saw Charlie. Still choked up, I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffed. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and that he hadn't gone scuba diving, which means that whoever this guy was, it wasn't Marvin. To this day, I still don't know who this guy was and what he wanted, and why he tried to kill me, maybe twice. So I just want to say from the outset that I don't know if this guy was just mentally disturbed and kidding, or if he was actually malicious and just failed. So I was maybe 16 years old, and I was kind of a rebellious kid. I joined Tinder to meet some older guys, and I matched with this really attractive 20-year-old that seemed really into me. Naive, I know. But he asked to pick me up from school the following day to get ice cream and walk around a nearby lake, and I said yes. He picked me up, and we had a great conversation, nothing really weird, and it seemed like we really enjoyed each other's company. But when we got to the lake, no one was there because it was the middle of October and cold on the water. But we walked about halfway around the lake, and that's when it got, well, weird. So he started talking to me about crime documentaries and how he'd studied them and knew how to kill someone without getting caught. He started making tracks in the mud and said that he would want to wear 2 big shoes so the police couldn't match him on shoe size. He picked up his shoe to show me a size 10.5 and informed me that he wore an 8. At that, I got a bit uneasy. He was strolling around me while I was sitting on the bench, like I was sort of prey almost. He went to one of those doggy bag dispensers and pulled one off. He sheathed it up to his elbow and started swatting it in my face. I thought that he might be trying to gross me out or something, so I was sort of half giggling and swatting it away. On one of my swats, he grabbed my forearm and pulled me in, and then put the bag over my head. Still, I thought that he might be kidding, but as I tried to get away, I noticed that he wasn't going to let up. I was starting to panic now, realizing that I wasn't getting any air, and he picked me up in a sort of headlock position. I was kicking and trying to elbow him, and I guess one of those elbows connected to his groin, and we both fell to the ground. He laughed and said, "You've got more fight in you than I thought you did. I was just going to make you pass out, but I didn't even get that far. I'm proud of you." All of my stuff, a phone, and yes, a taser as well, was in his car on the other side of the lake at this point, so I decided to play along and pretend that it was funny. I told him that I needed my inhaler now and to walk me back. He did, surprisingly, and I got in his car and grabbed my taser immediately and my phone out. While we walked around the back of the car to his driver's side, I texted my mum SOS and to track my location. When I looked up from my phone, though, I noticed the guy had pulled out a pocket knife, and then he slowly laid the tip into my chest, just enough for it to almost pierce the skin. He just blankly stared at me, and this went on for a good 30 full seconds. I don't know why, too, but I just said, "You're not going to do it." And this seemed to snap him out of it, and he paused, and then hysterically laughed. Between laughs, he got out, "That's the second time I could have killed you today." The whole drive home, he proceeded to tell me about what he was going to do with my body if I had accidentally died that day. Well, I got home and I bolted out of his car, and as soon as I did, he sped off. I got some explicit pictures later that night, and then he blocked me. I looked him up, and it turns out that he was actually 27 years old and had a criminal record for domestic violence. That's all I could get on him, though, and obviously I reported it to the police, but nothing ever came of it. Probably because I wasn't willing to tell my parents what happened. But either way, it was definitely the worst encounter of my life. For some background, I live in the UK and go to a school with a uniform. I go to quite a large all-girls school with about 8 classes of 30 per year, with 5 years and a sixth form attached, so I've heard about creeps lingering outside of the school before, but they're usually sorted out quite quickly by school staff. At the time, I was in year 9, so just 13 and about 4'9". I had a big homework assignment due, and because I didn't have a computer at home, I stayed late at school to do it at the ICT suite. As it was the beginning of the school year, it was relatively dark at 5 p.m, which is when I got out of school and this event took place. So the bus stop outside my school was a fairly busy place, but there were a couple of other people and me. I had my back up against a fence, and I noticed a man under the bus stop, facing away from, but next to the road and opposite the fence that I was leaning on. I was aware of my surroundings, as I had previous experiences with old creeps here, and I'm just generally a bit of a paranoid person as it is. The man didn't strike me as particularly interesting, but I did notice him glare over at me from the corner of my eye. I then saw a bus and assumed it was mine, so I stepped forward to check. It wasn't my bus, which was annoying as I was cold and didn't have a coat at the time. But as I went to step back up against the fence, I almost stood back into the man that was under the bus stop originally, because he had moved to directly behind me, and he had his arm against the pole next to the bus stop now, the one that tells you when the buses come to the bus stop and whatnot. I felt a bit cornered, to be honest, but couldn't really move as the other side of me had all the people waiting to get on this bus that was coming. It felt like forever too, as I could feel this man's breath on the top of my head as I watched the bus come and go and collect all the other people at the bus stop, but it was probably only a minute and a half, I would guess. Once the last person got on that bus, I quickly moved out of this man's area and back up against the fence. He moved so that he was back under the bus stop, sitting across from me, just staring at the ground. At last, though, my bus finally came after about 3 minutes like that. I didn't want to give away the fact that I was getting on this bus, but I had to wave it down, so I stood next to the road to signal it over. As I did, though, my heart really got racing when I noticed that the man was back behind me. I had already got my bus card out and scanned it very quickly, and only saw a few people downstairs. Normally there might be a few people upstairs, so that's where I headed. And that was a wise decision, or mistake. I don't know, to be honest, but I got up there and it was completely empty. Great, I thought. Well, I couldn't really go back down at this point because I knew the man had already gotten on and would be coming up the stairs, so I did the next best thing. I sat in the outside seat directly in front of the bus's camera, which I kept looking at directly, just in case something happened. The man came up the stairs as expected, and he sat at the right back of the bus, but not before looking and smiling at me as he passed. It was then, though, that I had the idea that maybe just saved me. So I live on a quiet street, and it was already dark now, so there was no way that I was getting off this bus, at my stop with this man at least. I pulled out my phone and my earbuds. I put one bud in my ear and texted my best friend to play along when I FaceTimed her and informed her of the situation. She understood, and along with some small talk, I talked sort of loudly, about how my mum was so mad that I had stayed late at school and that she had texted me saying that she was waiting at the door for me, and I had told her that I was only 10 minutes away. In reality, I told my mum that I was staying late in the morning before I left for school, and now my mum was at work, 45 minutes away, and so was my dad, about an hour and a half away, with limited access to either of their phones. I was at my stop to get off now, and I took a deep breath as I stood up. I looked back at the man, and he was looking at me as I walked down the stairs. My friend was screen recording at this point, just in case something went down. Thankfully, he didn't actually follow me down, but as I was walking away from the bus, I looked back to see him against the back window, hands and fists, just sort of staring at me and shaking them. That's when I took my flimsy school shoes off, and I sprinted to my house, as the next bus stop was still in eyesight. There were 2 on the main road that led down to my street. Once I was down my street and far enough away that you couldn't see the top of it anymore, I told my friend about him up against the window. She understood, and I put my shoes back on and sped walked the rest of the way to my house. Thankfully, he didn't get off at the next stop and try and follow me or anything, but my family, they still don't know about this, even though I was quite proud of myself on how I handled the situation and how I had run with no shoes on, a heavy skirt, and a big rucksack on my back like that. And I don't really know if they ever will know, because as much as I don't want to ever stay late at school ever again, I know I probably will have to again at some point, and I don't want my parents to feel guilty about not being able to help if something more serious was to happen while they were at work. But yeah, in the end, everything worked out okay, but it was definitely an unnerving experience. I don't know why he was exactly following me like that, or why he had those closed fists at the end, and staring at me like that. But I can't help but feel like I dodged something that day. Something terrifying. This was over a year ago, so I'm safe now, but this at the time was pretty creepy. So, I'd broken up with my now ex back in January of 2019, and it was my doing. I was angry at everything and had joined Tinder, talked to a guy that seemed pretty cool and was quite attractive. I talked to him quite a bit, took a lift down to where he lived. Now, his dad had passed away not too long ago, so he moved back in with his mum to help out. I found that pretty sweet, and so I didn't think anything of it. We took a lift to Walmart and to the liquor store as his mum had requested some wine. I'd bought a pizza to bake at their home to make a decent impression, and I purchased her wine, which she gave me cash for despite my protests, again trying to make a good impression. This home, too, was absolutely gorgeous. They had like an old-timey sort of jukebox thing, and the sink taps in the bathroom were installed in the mirrors. What I mean is that the water flowed from a spout in the mirrors. His mum, too, was as sweet as a southern tea, and she also seemed to like me, which was great. So, this guy had been messaging his lesbian best friend, C, and explained that he had helped her out after she broke her ankle and such. Again, I thought, what a nice guy. We drank, we did the naughty, and everything was cool. I had told him that I had borderline before we met up, and I even warned him that I had some scars from previous incidences, but nothing recent. And he said that he was fine with it and understood. The next morning I had an interview at a major company call center, and his mum actually offered to drive me. Really nice lady too, and I did a great job in the interview and was actually offered the job in the end, and I immediately texted this guy to tell him the good news. So one day when I was home and I had slept for about 8 hours, I'd wake up to a dozen text messages and over 20 Facebook messages from him. It ranged from, hey, how's it going, to this is hard to say, and I saw how the messages progressed as quickly as I scrolled through them and saw that one that said something like, those cut marks? Yeah, I wouldn't have dated someone doing this anyway. Most of them are just so pathetic that you need to get some serious help. But might as well keep doing that since it seems to be your only friend, and just stuff like that. And I mean, what the heck, right? I blocked him immediately, though, and then I posted it to my Facebook page so that if anyone knew him, they could know what he was actually up to. And it just so happened that I got a friend request from his lesbian best friend, C. She filled me in that she was not a lesbian. She had actually broken up with this guy hours before befriending me. In other words, they were still dating when he had me over, and he told her that I was a lesbian. She also told me that he goes by his middle name. Now, I had done a basic search with the name that he provided, and on his Facebook page, to make sure that he wasn't a felon or something like that before meeting him. Well, when I did the search with his real first name, sure as the sun comes up in the morning, so many charges were on this thing, including child pornography. He had been actually stalking her, pinging her phone location, and messaging her stuff like, oh what, you're going to leave your house now? And he also messaged her just some really nasty things. She had actually gotten the cops involved at this stage. She had sent me screenshots of the messages that he was sending. We talked a bit more, and while I'm not a medical professional, it was kind of clear that something was definitely wrong. I mean, he was lying, manipulative, aggressive, angry, and obviously his moods would flip faster than mine. I offered to send her what I could of the messages that I had in case she could use them to build a case against him or something. But shortly after this, I get a friend request from a name that I don't recognize, something generic like Mike or something. Then I get a message, "Hey, it's Jay. How's it going? How was your job at insert big company name that I'd been hired at that his mum drove me to the interview of?" And man, I was freaked out, because that meant that he knew where I worked. Now, the building was secure, but the parking lot, not so much. I got some pepper spray and I called my dad, who has been in the police force and such since before I was even alive, and he advised to not carry a baseball bat because if it was wrestled from me that it could be used against me, but pepper spray was a decent choice. He also said that while online bullying isn't really something the police can do much about, if he messages me again though, that it goes into the harassment area and it needed to be reported ASAP. I was getting off work after midnight and I was really scared, but I parked as close to the building as possible, pepper spray in hand. Fortunately, I haven't run into him since, and I definitely do not want to meet up with him again. I've also moved since and changed jobs not long after this incident too, and I think that for now, I'm actually safe. This happened to me, a 23-year-old female, and to a good friend that I had, Jenny, when we were both in high school, so probably about 6 years ago. We were 16 and we loved drinking and smoking, but since we were underage, we had spent quite a few nights standing next to a convenience store waiting for an adult stranger who agreed to buy us something to drink and cigarettes with our own money, of course. But the store is in a pretty trafficked part of town. A lot of people come in and out of the cars, buses, pedestrians, pretty much from all over the place. Also, we live in a pretty safe city, pretty much no crime. We can walk at nights, in fact, at 3 a.m. without having to worry too much. And I remember this one time where Jenny and I walked to this store to try and buy some cigarettes. It wasn't too late in the evening when we succeeded, and sat on a bench next to the store for a smoke, when a strange man looks at us, parks his car and exits the driver's seat to open all of his car doors and stand there. Weirdly too, he was sort of staring at us, at different parts of his car and then at the floor. He looked like he was in his late 50s, frizzy white hair and eyes that looked extremely unaware, but not frantic or anything. Now, I don't know if most girls are like this. I know I'm not, and my logic says that we shouldn't be like this for the most part, but I seem to attract girls who are very engaging when a person who screams stranger danger approaches them. Creeps, weirdos, men who just awkwardly disturb us just to hit on one of us, even though none of us are interested. But somehow, every good girlfriend that I've had this very annoying and, may I say, unsafe habit to entertain these sorts of harassers. And this man felt incredibly off to me. And I remember Jenny looking at him, then me in a confused look when he walked towards us, a few meters from his car with all of his car doors still open. He stood like 2 meters away from us and about a meter from his car, starting a babbling monologue about how he lost his phone inside of his car, he thinks perhaps underneath the seat. My heart is beating quickly just from thinking about this too, but he didn't give us a second to respond before asking us to look for it for him. Jenny stands up and starts walking to his car. I don't know much about cars. It was an old grey standard vehicle, not a van or anything, but I yelled, "Hey Jen, what are you doing? Don't go inside a strange man's car." The man noticed this, and Jenny says, "I'm not getting inside, relax. I'm just looking from the outside with a flash camera." He says, "No, please, just look inside to find it." She put maybe 1 foot inside, but I gave her a look, and I try to entertain this situation, and mostly him, so that he would notice that she's inside of his car behind him. So I asked the man, "Why do you think your phone is underneath the seat, anyway?" "Well, I was driving here and heard it ring from somewhere inside the car when my daughter called. I thought it might be inside my pocket or something." "And it isn't? How would you know that it's your daughter if you lost it?" "No, it might be in my pocket. I don't know. Can you check?" walks a little closer to me. He had a really confused look, like he sincerely didn't know where his phone was, like he was a kid. No. What? Ew. Why would I check your pocket? You're a grown man. Check it yourself. By this time, Jenny comes back to stand near me, as this man is a complete weirdo and is scaring us now. As he continues to ask and beg us to check inside of his car, I just flat out tell him no, and that I can call his number for him to see where the ring is coming from if he really wants. The man says that he's out of battery, so it wouldn't help. Keeps asking to basically crawl into his back seat. Thank God for extreme situational alertness while in situations of stress like this, because the next thing I said may have saved Jenny, who was completely engaging and stood next to his car for a long while. Hey, so you said your daughter just called you and that you heard it from inside the car? And if you didn't find the phone since then you have no way of knowing the status of your battery. And if you did, then you're harassing us, sir, and we're leaving. Good luck finding your phone inside your pocket yourself. Now revisiting this story, I'm aware that there could be reasonable explanations to all of this that could contradict this whole creep guy narrative, sure. Maybe he was just too old to bend over to look for his phone. Maybe this was an emergency and that's why he was so incoherent and anxious to find his phone. Maybe he was out of battery and his speakerphone in his car passed his daughter's next phone call over to the car system. But nothing I can really think of can explain him being so stubborn with wanting us inside the car. Or the fact that he wanted me to look inside of his pocket. So, whatever reasons that could make this story less creepy, they don't really stand given all the circumstances.